The clown. The original It was already scary, but the remake somehow made everything even worse. The 1990 version is remembered mostly because of Tim Curry's performance as Pennywise. He has that weird, almost playful vibe that makes you uncomfortable without needing to overdo it. But aside from that, the movie shows the limitations of its time, especially in the effects and in how it builds horror. By 2017, everything hits harder. Bill Skarsgård brings a completely different Pennywise, quieter, more unpredictable, and visually disturbing. The appearances are more intense, the scares work better, and the atmosphere is much darker, but the biggest improvement isn't just the horror, it's the character. The remake focuses much more on the losers club. We get to know each kid, understand their fears, and watch their friendship grow naturally. That makes every scene hit harder, because you actually care about what might happen to them. On top of that, the movie structures the story better by splitting it into parts and focusing only on their childhood first, which makes everything more engaging. Even with all the technical improvements, a lot of people still consider Tim Curry's Pennywise unbeatable in charisma. But when it comes to being genuinely terrifying, the 2017 remake clearly raises the bar.
1, 2. You okay?
Nosferatu. Nosferatu was a classic that defined horror, but its modern version tries to be even more disturbing. This comparison starts with one important detail. The original basically created this kind of horror. Directed by F.W. Murnau, the film follows the arrival of Count Orlok, a strange figure who brings disease and death wherever he goes. It's not jump scare horror, it's atmospheric horror. Everything feels wrong, silent, uncomfortable, and Max Schreck's look as the vampire is still impossible to forget. Now, the 2024 remake, directed by Robert Eggers, takes that foundation and pushes it to another technical level. The story still revolves around the vampire's influence over a town, but here everything is more detailed. The Orlok played by Bill Skarsgård isn't just strange, he's almost repulsive, in the sense that his presence alone makes you uncomfortable. The film uses sound, cinematography, and pacing to trap you in that atmosphere without letting up. While the original works through simplicity and constant nightmare-like tension, the remake leans into depth, world building, and visual impact. The Ballet Club. Imagine watching two versions of the same story and feeling like you saw two completely different movies. That's where the classic Suspiria and its remake come in, a comparison people still debate today. In the original, directed by Dario Argento, the story of young Susie arriving at the academy exists, but almost feels secondary. The real focus is the experience: bold colors, exaggerated lighting, and a soundtrack by Goblin that keeps you on edge the whole time. It's the kind of horror that doesn't want to explain much. It wants to make you feel weird, uncomfortable, like you're trapped inside a nightmare. The remake, directed by Luca Guadagnino, goes in a different direction. Here, the story carries more weight. We understand better what's happening, learn more about the witches, the rules of that world, and even the political context of divided Berlin. The protagonist Susie stops being just a victim and becomes much more important to the plot, which completely changes how you view everything. And there's one detail that makes a huge difference: the dancing. In the original, it's there, but it doesn't dominate the story. In the remake, it becomes the heart of the horror, used as part of the rituals and the biggest decisions in the story. A lot of people expected the remake to copy the colorful look of the classic, but the director intentionally did the opposite, creating a cold and realistic aesthetic. Result? Two films with the same foundation but totally different experiences. The Invisible Man. The Invisible Man from 1933 follows a scientist who discovers invisibility and completely loses control. The story is more straightforward, almost theatrical at times. The 2020 remake changes everything. Here, the story isn't about the person who becomes invisible, it's about the person who suffers because of it. The protagonist Cecilia tries to rebuild her life after escaping an abusive relationship, but she starts feeling like she's being watched and followed, even though no one is visible. And that's where the movie absolutely nails it. Invisibility becomes a metaphor for manipulation, control, and that constant fear of not being believed. Another point in the remake's favor is realism. Instead of a crazy formula, invisibility comes from advanced technology, which makes it feel more believable. And that completely changes the experience because the horror doesn't feel distant. It feels possible. The 2020 film was heavily praised for reinventing the story instead of just copying it, and it's often cited as one of the few remakes that genuinely adds something new. The Neighbor. In Fright Night, we follow Charlie Brewster, a normal teenager who starts suspecting his new neighbor is a vampire, and he's not paranoid, he actually is. The movie fully embraces that 80s vibe, with a mix of horror and humor that still works today. The standout here is Peter Vincent, a TV host who specializes in horror movies, but is in reality insecure and kind of lost. That dynamic gives the movie personality. On top of that, the practical effects are a show of their own, especially during the transformations, which, even if dated, still have a style many people find more memorable than modern CGI. In the remake, the story is updated but keeps the same core. Charlie is still the kid who notices something wrong with his neighbor, but now everything happens in a more modern setting with faster pacing. The vampire Jerry, played by Colin Farrell, is very different from the original version. He's less charming and much more direct, with a more threatening presence. The film also moves the setting to a city like Las Vegas, which creates an interesting logic. A place where nobody pays attention to anyone becomes perfect for someone trying to hide. Another strong point of the remake is the cast, with names like Anton Yelchin and David Tennant, who bring a different energy to the story. The remake manages to modernize the film without losing its essence, even if many fans still prefer the original's charm and unique identity. The cabin. In The Evil Dead, everything starts with a group of friends spending time in an isolated cabin in the woods. There they find a tape and a strange book, and of course decide to mess with something they shouldn't. From there, everything spirals completely out of control. The film, directed by Sam Raimi, became iconic because of its insane creativity on a low budget. The frantic camera work, weird angles, and chaotic atmosphere give it a unique identity. And there's also Bruce Campbell as Ash. Even while more serious here, already shows the charisma that later defined the franchise. The remake changes the approach quite a bit. The story still involves a cabin and evil forces, but now the focus is on Mia, a young woman trying to overcome addiction while isolated with her friend. That immediately gives the narrative a different weight. When things start going wrong, the movie doesn't hold back. This is straight horror with no room for humor. Everything is darker, more serious, and more intense. The remake stands out for its use of practical effects. Even though it's modern, it avoids relying heavily on CGI and instead uses physical effects that make everything feel more real and uncomfortable. And the climax is over the top in exactly the right way, creating a sequence many consider one of the most impactful in modern horror. Sam Raimi himself supported the remake, which helped give the project more credibility. The desert. In The Hills Have Eyes, directed by Wes Craven, the story follows a family stranded in the desert after taking a wrong turn. What seemed like just a road trip turns into a nightmare when they realize they're not alone. The film leans into a raw aesthetic, with that dirty movie feel of the 70s that makes everything more uncomfortable. The villains are an isolated and violent family, with Papa Jupiter and the striking look of Michael Berryman standing out as one of horror's most iconic faces. It's a more direct, simpler film, but it works because of how real it feels. Meanwhile, in the remake directed by Alexandra Aja, the same premise gets a much larger scale. The family is still stranded in the desert, but now the danger is more intense and constant. The remake adds a new layer. The antagonists are the result of nuclear testing, which not only explains their origins better, but also makes their appearance more disturbing. The film is heavier, more intense, and doesn't hold back on the feeling of danger. One of the most praised aspects is the development of protagonist Doug, who starts as an ordinary guy and is forced to completely change in order to survive and protect his family. That gives the story more emotional weight. On top of that, the bigger budget allows for more immersive scenes and stronger tension building. The remake is considered one of the few that surpasses the original in execution while still keeping its essence. Revenge. In The Last House on the Left, also directed by Wes Craven, the story follows two young women who cross paths with a group of criminals during a trip. The situation spirals completely out of control, and the film takes an extremely raw path that can be almost uncomfortable to watch. The style is simple with an indie production feel, but that actually helps the realism. There is one detail, though, that still divides opinions today. The film mixes heavy moments with out-of-place comedic scenes, mainly involving the police, which breaks the tone in several parts. Even so, it became known as one of the boldest films of its era. In the 2009 remake, the approach is much more focused. The basic story stays the same, but the film puts more effort into developing the characters and giving more emotional weight to what happened. The family gets more development, the antagonists have clearer motivations, and the movie keeps a serious tone from beginning to end, without the tonal whiplash of the original. Another standout improvement is the technical side. The remake has stronger cinematography and more effective suspense building. The Mine. My Bloody Valentine was another slasher that defined its generation and introduced a new villain to horror cinema. The story takes place in a small mining town where an old accident left a deep scar. Years later, the residents try to bring back Valentine's Day celebrations, but something starts to go wrong. A killer appears, bringing the trauma of the past back with him. The biggest strength here is the atmosphere. The film uses the mine setting extremely well, creating a constant sense of claustrophobia. Everything feels dark, tight, and unpredictable. On top of that, the mystery surrounding the killer's identity and the love triangle angle between the characters help keep the tension going until the end. In My Bloody Valentine 3D, the approach is much more direct. The foundation of the story stays the same, but the movie speeds up the pacing and goes for immediate impact. Here, the highlight is the more graphic violence and the heavy use of 3D, which was pushed almost like a theme park attraction. The cast also stands out, with Jensen Ackles bringing more charisma to the lead role and helping connect with a younger audience. The remake works as a modern slash, flashy, entertaining, and visually aggressive, but in exchange, it loses some of the quieter tension of the original. While the 1981 film builds fear slowly, the 2009 version prefers to deliver everything more immediately. The Outbreak. In The Crazies, the story begins when a mysterious contamination turns the residents of a small town into extremely violent and unpredictable people. But the film doesn't focus only on that. It splits a lot of time between the chaos in town and the government's response, showing the military trying to contain the situation. The idea is interesting, but the pacing ends up uneven. At times, the movie seems more concerned with showing bureaucracy than the danger itself. Even so, it carries strong social commentary, very much in line with the era, reflecting distrust toward authority. In the 2010 remake, the story follows Sheriff David Dutton and his wife trying to survive while the town collapses around them. Here, the focus is entirely on the characters and their experience during the outbreak. That makes the narrative more engaging and easier to follow, since the movie doesn't get lost in so many subplots. The remake also improves significantly on a technical level, with stronger effects and better tension build. The pacing is faster, with constant developments that maintain a feeling of danger the entire time. On top of that, Radha Mitchell's performance helps give the story more emotional weight. Even though the original is important for influencing many outbreak and infection films, the remake is often cited as one of the cases where the newer version improves the execution without losing the core idea. The Cursed Tape. In 1998's Ringu, He Story begins with a simple but terrifying urban legend, a videotape that kills whoever watches it after a few days. We follow Reiko Asakawa, a journalist who decides to investigate the case after her niece's mysterious death, and things get stranger and stranger as she tries to uncover the curse's origin. The film leans heavily on silence, eerie atmosphere, and that constant feeling that something is wrong even when nothing is happening. It doesn't rush, it doesn't exaggerate, it's the kind of horror that slowly gets under your skin. Meanwhile, in 2002's The Ring, the remake takes that same foundation and turns it into a more intense and detailed experience. Here, Rachel Keller takes the lead role, and the investigation gets much more focused, exploring Samara's past in greater depth. While the original leaves many things ambiguous, the remake gives more answers and builds a fuller narrative. The remake also features scenes that became iconic in modern horror. Visually, the film changes a lot too. The American version uses a constant greenish filter that creates a heavy atmosphere from beginning to end, almost like the whole world has been contaminated by the curse. The success of The Ring was so massive that it opened the door for many other Japanese horror remakes in Hollywood, which is exactly why so many people remember the 2002 version so fond. The Mall. In 1978's Dawn of the Dead, directed by the legendary filmmaker George A. Romero, we follow a small group of survivors trying to escape a zombie outbreak that has already overtaken society. They end up taking refuge in a shopping mall, which becomes a kind of improvised fortress. At first, it seems like the perfect solution: food, safety, and comfort. But little by little, the place starts showing another side. The characters become isolated from the world, and the routine inside starts affecting them psychologically. And the most interesting detail? The zombies wander through the mall as if repeating habits from their past lives, turning the setting into sharp commentary on consumerism. The 2004 remake, however, changes the game completely. There's no time to breathe here. From the beginning, chaos explodes, and the zombies are fast, aggressive, and unpredictable. The feeling is constant danger, like no one is ever truly safe. The focus shifts away from reflection and becomes pure survival, with much more intense sequences. Visually, everything is more modern, especially the attack and escape scene. The film also helped popularize and further establish fast, vicious zombies, unlike many earlier portrayals where they were slow. And of course, who could forget the famous opening sequence? What many people don't know is that this remake was directed by Zack Snyder before he broke out with superhero movies, and it already showed his faster, visually striking style. Can you think of any other horror remake that's scarier than the original? If so, drop it in the comments. On screen is a video where we show scary horror movies you probably haven't seen. Click and watch. See you there.